A lonely rancher saved a Comanche daughter. Next day, her father returned with a strange gift. The plains stretched endless and unbroken, a sea of tawny grass bending under the sigh of a restless wind. The sky was wide as eternity, washed pale by the sun's steady hand. Somewhere in that expanse a lone rider moved, his figure small against the grandeur, a speck of persistence in a land that asked for nothing, yet took everything. The rancher was 34 years of age, though the lines about his eyes seemed carved by more than years alone. He rode without hurry, reins loose in his hand, his gaze neither hungry for fortune nor eager for company. Life had stripped him of both. His name mattered little in those wide lands. What mattered was the fence posts he drove, the cattle he counted, and the silence he kept like a companion. He lived not in bitterness, but in a resignation deep enough to feel like stone, acceptance that the world owed him nothing, and he in turn would ask for nothing more. His days were measured by chores, his nights by the small flicker of a lamp and the haunting hush of coyotes in the distance. A wooden house stood solitary on the stretch of his land, bare walls echoing with the absence of laughter, the hearth never warmed by another's voice. There were times he lingered at the edge of sleep and imagined a softness beside him, a hand, a word, a presence, but such dreams drifted off like smoke before dawn. He rose each day with only his horses and cattle to see him, and had been that way for years. But the plains had a way of stirring change when one least expected, and on that dry afternoon, while driving his herd toward water, the rancher heard it, a cry, faint yet sharp, threading through the wind like a broken song. He reined in his horse, head tilted, listening. There it was again, desperate, strangled, then silence. Not the cry of a bird, nor the bark of an animal. Human. He urged his horse toward the sound, cautious, eyes scanning the horizon. The canyon cut through the land not far from where he rode, its red walls shadowing pockets of sage. He found her there, in the shade of stone, slumped against the ground. A woman, bound at the wrists, dark hair falling loose across her face. Her dress was torn, the earth beneath her stained with dust and the bruising prints of rough hands. She was young yet grown, perhaps 26, her breath shallow but stubborn, her back straight even in ruin. The marks of struggle lay on her arms, her lips pressed tight in defiance. She did not weep, though it seemed she had every reason to. The rancher slid from his horse, boots crunching in the dirt. She lifted her head and met his gaze, and in her eyes there was no plea, only suspicion, fierce and unyielding. She did not know him, nor what he wanted. He knelt, his movements measured, and cut the rawhide binding her wrists. The rope gave way, and she rubbed her hands, though her eyes never left him. He offered his canteen. She hesitated, then drank slow, controlled, as though even thirst would not strip her of dignity. Her tongue formed words foreign to his ear, soft syllables spoken in Comanche. He did not understand, yet the weight of her tone carried meaning enough, mistrust, guarded strength, a refusal to bow. He did not press her with speech. Words, he had learned, were often more burden than balm. Instead, he extended his hand. She did not take it. With effort, she pushed herself upright, wavered, then steadied. She swayed as though the ground itself tilted beneath her, but she held herself firm, chin lifted. From the broken earth around them, it was clear what had happened. A scuffle, tracks leading off, hoof prints cut deep in the dust. Whoever had taken her had fled, perhaps chased off, perhaps finished with their cruelty. She had been left behind like a discarded thing, but there was nothing discarded in the way she stood. She was wounded but not defeated. The rancher led his horse closer, motioned for her to ride. She frowned, drawing back, but her legs trembled, and he knew the walk would break her strength. At last, wary, she allowed him to help her mount. He swung up behind, guiding the reins toward the ranch, neither speaking, only sharing the quiet rhythm of hooves striking earth. The sun was sinking when they reached his homestead, the horizon burning in shades of amber and blood. He dismounted, then lifted her gently down. She studied the house with narrowed eyes, plain boards, no grandeur, a place built for work, not show. Yet it was shelter, and she allowed him to guide her inside. The cabin smelled of dust and wood smoke. A narrow table stood near the hearth, a single chair pulled close. His bed, rough but clean, was set against the far wall. He stoked the fire, put on water, and laid bread and beans before her. She sat stiff, hands in her lap, her gaze darting to every corner, as though measuring his intentions. He ate little, letting her fill her hunger. She did not thank him with words, perhaps because she had none in his tongue, perhaps because gratitude was not something easily surrendered, but her eyes softened for the briefest moment as she ate. When night fell, he gave her the bed and took the floor by the hearth. She objected with a brief shake of her head, gesturing that he should not give up his place. But he would not hear it. He lay down on the wooden floor, his hat tipped over his face, the fire's glow warming the room. Sleep came slow. He listened to her breathing, steady now, no longer ragged, and felt a strange quiet settle over him. The silence was no longer empty. It held weight, the presence of another life. It was not comfort yet, but it was something close, like the first stirring of rain after a long drought. Days passed in a rhythm unfamiliar. She regained strength quickly, moving through his cabin with quiet resolve. When she found needle and thread, she mended the tear in her dress. When she discovered the wash basin, she carried water herself, though he offered to fetch it. She would not remain idle, even as a guest. She did not speak his tongue, nor he hers, but their silences grew less sharp, more like pauses between breaths. He showed her how to feed the chickens, how to grind corn at the table. She showed him small skills of her own, braiding cord, smoothing hides. Each gesture was an exchange, neither owing, neither owed. At night they sat by the fire, the hush between them filled not with fear, but with something unnamed. She would hum low songs sometimes, words carried in a language he did not know, but felt in the marrow of his chest. He found himself watching the way her eyes reflected flame, how her expression softened when she forgot to guard herself. And she, though wary, began to study him. He was not a man of quick laughter or boastful speech. He moved with quiet patience, tending his animals before his own hunger, repairing tools with steady hands. She saw in him no lust, no attempt to claim her as prize. This puzzled her, unsettled her, and slowly began to ease her fear. One evening a storm rolled across the plains, wind battering the shutters, rain hammering the roof. The two sat close by the fire, the storm's voice howling outside. For the first time she spoke a word he understood, his name, spoken softly, as though testing it. He looked at her, surprised, and she lowered her eyes, a faint trace of something like trust shaping her mouth. The next day rumors reached them. A trader passing through spoke of Comanche riders searching the land, a father's band hunting for the daughter taken by enemies. The rancher listened, silent, but his heart shifted. If her people came, they might not look kindly on her time spent in his home. He wondered what it would mean, for her, for him. That night, as the fire dwindled low, she sat near him, her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze lingered on him longer than before, a question unspoken, a decision weighing in her eyes. He felt the air thicken with something tender, unformed, fragile as a first bloom. He did not reach for her hand, though the urge burned in him. He only sat still, letting the moment rest between them, like a candle flame unbreathed. The coyotes sang in the distance, the plains stretching endless under a moon swollen with light. Inside the cabin, silence wove itself around them, not empty now, not sharp, but alive, pulsing, a quiet exchange between two souls learning to see each other. And somewhere in that silence, the faint tremor of change began, like a river stirring far beneath frozen ground, unseen but certain. Dawn came softly, brushing the plains with pale gold, but the quiet on the rancher's land was broken by the thrum of hooves. He stepped outside, his hand steady on the doorframe, and saw them crest the ridge, a line of riders cutting against the morning sky, their silhouettes sharp as flint. At their center rode a man whose bearing alone told of command, his figure cloaked in dignity, as if carved from the same earth that birthed the canyons. The rancher knew, without asking, that this was her father. The woman at his hearth had risen at the sound, her eyes wide with 1,000 feelings, hope, fear, longing. She stood behind him now, framed in the doorway, her breath catching when she recognized the one who led them. No words passed between them, but the tremor in her voice when she finally broke her silence reached deep into him. "Father." She stepped forward before he could stop her, her feet carrying her across the grass until she was swallowed into her father's arms. Their embrace was fierce, long, and full of the grief of days stolen, the relief of reunion. The rancher turned his eyes aside, granting them the privacy of love he could never claim. When at last her father released her, his gaze turned to the rancher. It was a gaze heavy with scrutiny, a weight that could strip a man of falsehoods. Warriors fanned out behind him, watchful, their distrust like a storm cloud rolling low. The rancher did not shrink from their eyes. He stood as he was, plain, unpolished, without excuse. The woman spoke, her voice carrying the tale in her tongue, gestures painting the moments of rescue, the cutting of ropes, the giving of water, the fire that warmed her, the silence that shielded her dignity. The father listened, his expression carved in stone, then turned to the rancher and asked in halting English what had transpired. The rancher answered simply, words spare, as always. He told of hearing her cry, of finding her abandoned, of bringing her here with no claim upon her but the duty of a man who could not walk away. He added nothing to paint himself noble, nor soften the edges of truth. She had stayed under his roof because she needed shelter. That was all. The father studied him long, the air between them taut with judgment. Then the daughter's hand slipped into her father's, and her eyes spoke what her tongue did not. This man had shown honor when others had shown cruelty. The tension loosened just a fraction. The father nodded once slow, as though weighing centuries of tradition against the fragile thread of this single story. That night the fire burned in the open yard, and both peoples, Comanche riders and the solitary rancher, gathered in its light. The woman sat near her father, yet her gaze strayed often toward the man who had kept her safe. The warriors whispered among themselves, but the chief sat silent, turning his thoughts like stones in a river. When at last he spoke, the night hushed. He said his daughter had endured much, and the spirits had guided her path not into ruin, but into safety. He said the man who had taken her in had not done so for gain or shame, but for honor, and honor must be met with honor. He stood tall in the glow, and proclaimed that his daughter's hand would be given to the rancher. A murmur rippled through the gathered, surprise mingled with doubt, but the chief's word was final. The rancher felt his chest tighten. He had not asked for this, yet when his eyes met hers, he saw no fear there, only a calm acceptance, as though she too had been walking slowly toward this moment since the night he cut her bonds. The silence between them shifted, no longer fragile but binding, as her hand slid into his. It was small against his, yet steady, warm, a tether he had never known he longed for. The father was not finished. He gestured toward the east, where in the grove near the river a new structure stood. At first the rancher thought it was some shelter raised for the band, but as the firelight played across its beams, he saw it for what it was, a house sturdy, beautiful in its craftsmanship, blending Comanche design with settler timber. The father explained that it was gift, a home raised for the two who would now walk together. It was not a purchase nor a bribe. It was recognition, a bond between his blood and the man who had earned his respect. They walked there at dawn, the rancher and the woman, side by side, the warriors trailing behind in quiet witness. She stepped across the threshold first, her fingers trailing along the carved wood, eyes wide at the warmth within. It was more than walls and roof. It was a promise of belonging, a place where roots might grow. For the rancher, who had lived in silence so long, it felt almost unbearable, as though the hollowness of his years was being filled too quickly, too tenderly. She turned to him, her gaze searching, and in that moment he understood. She had chosen this, not because her father commanded it, but because her spirit recognized his. The whisper between them, the quiet exchange of nights by the fire, the silences that had grown into trust, had become a home before walls had risen. Now the world itself had given it shape. Her father's blessing was spoken at the doorway, his hand raised in solemn strength. Then he mounted his horse, his riders gathering to him. He did not look back as he rode away, for his gift had been given, his trust laid down like stone. The rancher stood with her on the threshold, their hands joined. The prairie stretched before them, vast and uncertain, but no longer empty. For the first time in years, he felt the silence inside him break, not with words, not with sound, but with the quiet weight of belonging. The sun rose higher, painting the plains in light. She leaned against him, and he did not move, only breathed it in, the truth of it, the miracle of it, that a cry in the canyon had led to this, that two lives had bent toward each other like grass toward water. And in the hush of morning, it seemed the land itself exhaled, as though approving the joining of two souls who had found in each other not rescue, not debt, but home. If this story touched your heart, ride along with us by subscribing. Many more Wild West tales await by the fire.